Hello, everyone, and welcome to Soft Stories. I'm Stratton, and that is Pepper, and today we are going to be continuing our reading of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. While my little co-host gets herself comfortable in the background there, I will tell you what happened last time, just in case in the intervening period it has slipped your mind. Previously, it had been decided that the Nautilus would continue south from the Sargasso Sea, rather than head back north into European waters. The ship encountered a pod of whales, which Ned Land wished to pursue, but which the captain forbade him to, stifling the primitive hunting instincts of our Canadian friend. It seemed, though, that his bloodlust was to be sated, for the ship then encountered a pod of sperm whales which were pursuing the smaller right whales. In order to save this more peaceful group of animals, the Nautilus took it upon itself to engage with them in mortal combat, injuring many and killing more. The exact morality of this act, and how it relates to Ned Land's own profession as a whaler, seems questionable to me. I never really felt that we got any sense that the actions of the Nautilus were truly heroic, if animals are, by their nature, wont to engage in struggles for food amongst one another. It seems wrong for humanity to tip the scales in favor of one over the other in a case like this, where the two groups were, in many respects, so similar to one another. But in spite of my own moral reservations, the act was completed, and the journey south continued into Antarctic waters. The Nautilus acted as an icebreaker ship as it traveled south towards the pole until it could go no further, and then it submerged beneath the waves, hoping to break through the great ice wall which was thought at that time to surround the Antarctic pole. Where we left off was the moment at which the ship regained the surface, replenished its air supplies, and found open water again. And now that Pepper looks so much more comfortable, I think it's time to continue our story with Chapter 38, The South Pole. I rushed out on the platform. Yes, we were in open water. There were only a few icebergs scattered here and there. A broad sea stretched out into the distance. The sky was full of birds, and myriads of fish swam in the water, ranging in color from a deep blue to olive green. The thermometer read 37 degrees. Relatively speaking, it was like spring here, behind the great ice barrier, whose far-off masses were outlined against the northern horizon. "Are we at the South Pole?" I asked the captain, with my heart throbbing. I don't know, he said. At noon, we'll take our position. But will we be able to see the sun through these clouds? I asked, looking up at the grey sky. We will only need to get a faint glimpse of it to be able to take our position, the captain replied. 10 miles to the south, a solitary island rose about 700 feet above the surface. We headed for it cautiously, for these waters could have been strewn with reefs. An hour later we had reached it, and in 2 more hours we had all gone all the way around it. It was 4 or 5 miles in circumference. A narrow channel separated it from a considerable body of land, perhaps an entire continent, whose limits we could not see. The existence of this land seemed to prove Maury right. This clever American scientist has stated, in fact, that between the South Pole and the 60th parallel, the sea is covered with enormous icebergs, much bigger than those found in the North Atlantic. From this he has deduced that within the Antarctic Circle there lies a considerable body of land, since icebergs cannot form over water, but only at coastlines. According to his calculations, the mass of ice surrounding the South Pole forms a cap about 2,500 miles wide. The Nautilus had stopped out of fear of running aground, about 600 yards from a beach, above which rose a superb mass of rocks. The dinghy was put to sea, and the captain, 2 of his men carrying instruments, Conseil and myself, got in. It was 10 in the morning. I had not seen Ned land. He, undoubtedly, did not relish the idea of having to swallow his words in the presence of the South Pole. Several strokes of the oars brought the dinghy to the sandy shore, where it was beached. Conseil was about to jump out, but I held him back. Monsieur, I said to Captain Nemo, it is your privilege to be the first to set foot on this land. Yes, monsieur, answered the captain, and if I don't hesitate to go ashore on the South Pole, it is because till now no human being has ever been here. With this, he jumped out lightly onto the sand. His heart beat with emotion. He climbed up to an overhanging rock on the little promontory, and there, with his arms crossed, eyes burning, immobile and silent, he seemed to take possession of these Antarctic regions. After spending 5 minutes in this state of ecstasy, he turned toward us and said, "Whenever you wish, monsieur." Conseil and I got out, leaving the 2 men in the dinghy. Over a considerable area, the terrain consisted of reddish volcanic rock, looking as if it had been made of ground bricks. It was covered with bits of slag, hardened lava, and pumice stone. There was no doubt about its volcanic origin. In certain places, little smoke holes gave out a sulphurous odor and bore witness to the fact that the fires inside the earth still retained their force. However, upon climbing a steep slope, I saw no volcanoes within a radius of several miles. It is well known, however, that in the Antarctic, James Ross discovered the two craters called Erebus and Terror in full activity at 167 degrees west longitude and 77 degrees 32 minutes south latitude. The vegetation of this desolate continent seemed very limited. Some lichens of the species Usnea melanoxantha were spread out on the black rocks. These, along with certain microscopic plants such as diatoms, with their single cells placed between two quartz shells, and long purple and crimson sea wrack thrown up on the shore by the surf, were the only signs of plant life in this region. The coast was sprinkled with shellfish, little mussels, limpets, smooth heart-shaped cockles, and especially clyones, with their oblong membranous bodies and their head made of two round lobes. We also saw many of those inch-long Arctic clyones, which a whale swallows by the hundreds and thousands in one mouthful. The water near the shore was alive with these charming pteropods, veritable butterflies of the sea. Among other zoophytes, in the shallows I noticed some tree-shaped corals of a type which, according to James Ross, live in Antarctic waters down to depths of 3,000 feet. I also saw little Alcyoniae, belonging to the species Procellaria pelagica, as well as a great number of starfish peculiar to this region. But it was in the air that life really abounded. Thousands of birds of all kinds soared and fluttered overhead, deafening us with their cries. Others were crowded together on rocks, watching us pass by so fearlessly that sometimes we even had to step over them. There were auks, so agile and supple in the water that they could be mistaken for bonitos, and yet so clumsy and heavy on land. They let out strange cries and assembled in large groups, moving little, but making a great deal of noise. Among other birds, I noticed some chionies, belonging to the wader family. They're about the size of pigeons, white in colour, with a short, conical beak and a red circle around their eyes. Conseil captured a few, for if well cooked, these birds can make a very good dish. Overhead passed sooty albatrosses with a wingspan of about 13 feet, justly called the vultures of the ocean. Giant petrels, and among others a species called the sea eagle, which is a great killer of seals. A kind of small checkered duck, and many other kinds of ordinary petrels, some whitish with brown borders on their wings, and another bluish species, peculiar to Antarctic waters, which is so full of oil, as I told Conseil, that the inhabitants of the Faroe Islands merely stick a wick in them before lighting them. "What a pity," said Conseil, "that nature didn't build them with the wicks already in. That way they would have made perfect lamps." Half a mile further on, the ground was riddled with penguin nests. They were like burrows, arranged for laying eggs, and out of them would scramble innumerable birds, braying like donkeys. Later on, Captain Nemo had several hundred penguins hunted and killed, for their black flesh is very good to eat. These creatures, with their slate-colored bodies, white bellies, and lemon-yellow bands around their necks, would allow themselves to be killed with stones without even trying to run away. Meanwhile, the sky was still grey, and at 11 o'clock the sun had not yet appeared. I was afraid it would not come out, and without the sun it was impossible to take our position. How, then, would we know if we had reached the South Pole? When I rejoined Captain Nemo, I found him silently leaning on a rock and looking up at the sky. He seemed impatient and annoyed. But what could he do? This brave, powerful man had no sway over the sun as he did over the sea. Noon came, without the sun having appeared for a single moment. One could not even make out where it was behind the curtain of clouds. Then it began to snow. "We will try again tomorrow," said the captain, and we went back to the Nautilus amid flurries of snow. During our absence, the nets had been put out, and I was interested to see what fish had been hauled on board. Antarctic waters serve as a place of refuge for a great number of migratory fish, who flee the storms of other regions, only to be eaten, it must be said, by porpoises and seals. I noted several miller's thumbs, about 4 inches long, whitish with pale stripes and armed with spines, and also some chimera, about 3 feet long, with slim bodies, silvery smooth skin, round heads, 3 fins on their back, and a snout shaped like a trunk curving in toward their mouth. I tasted them, but found them flavorless, whereas Conseil found they were very much to his liking. The snowstorm lasted until the next day. It was impossible to stay on the platform. I stayed in the lounge, noting down the incidents of this polar excursion, and from there I could hear the cries of the petrels and albatrosses playing about in the midst of the storm. The Nautilus did not remain immobile. It travelled 10 or so miles farther along the coast to the south, cruising in a kind of half-light left by the sun as it touched the horizon. On the next day, March the 20th, the snow had stopped, but it was a bit colder. The thermometer marked 28 degrees. The clouds were lifting, and I hoped that we would be able to take our position that day. Since Captain Nemo had not yet appeared, the dinghy took Conseil and me to shore. Here, too, the ground was volcanic. Everywhere there were traces of lava, slag, and basalt, but I was unable to find the crater which had emitted them. Here, as before, myriads of birds flew overhead, but now they had to share their dominion with vast herds of marine mammals looking at us with their soft eyes. There were various kinds of seals, some stretched out on the ground, others lying on drift ice, and many going in or coming out of the sea. They had never seen men before, and therefore did not run away as we drew near. I reckoned there were enough of them here to stock several hundred ships.
It's lucky, said Conseil, that Ned Land didn't come along with us.
Why, Conseil?
Because the way he feels about hunting, he would have killed them all.
Not all of them. That's a bit too much. But I doubt we could have prevented our Canadian friend from harpooning several of these magnificent creatures. And this wouldn't have pleased Captain Nemo, who doesn't like to shed the blood of innocent animals without reason.
He's right.
He certainly is, Conseil. But tell me, haven't you yet classified these superb specimens of marine fauna?
Oh, as Monsieur knows, answered Conseil, I'm not very good at practical classification. If Monsieur could tell me the names of these animals.
They're seals and walruses.
Both of these genera belong to the family of the pinnipeds,
Conseil hastened to say.
Order of carnivores, division of ungulates, subclass of monodelphians, class of mammals, subkingdom of vertebrates.
Good, Conseil, I replied. But these two genera of seals and walruses are divided into various species, which, if I'm not mistaken, we'll be able to observe. Let's go. It was 8 in the morning. We still had 4 hours until the sun would be usable for taking our position. I led the way to a vast bay cut into the granite cliffs along the shore. There, as far as the eye could see, the ground and floating ice was covered with these creatures, and I involuntarily looked for old Proteus, the mythological shepherd, who watched over these immense flocks belonging to Neptune. Most of them were seals. They were in groups, with the males and females each carrying out their own tasks. The father watched over the family, and the mother suckled her young, while those little seals, already strong enough to walk, wandered off a short distance. When these creatures wanted to move, they did it in a series of little jumps made by contracting their bodies and helping themselves clumsily along with their flippers. But I must say that once they are in water, their natural element, these animals, with their flexible spinal column, narrow pelvis, close-cropped hair, and webbed feet, can swim marvelously. When they rest on land, they lie in graceful positions. Thus the ancients, noting their gentle faces, their expressive eyes, which are unsurpassed by those of the most beautiful women, and their charming attitudes, poetically changed the males into tritons and the females into mermaids. I pointed out to Conseil the highly developed cerebral lobes of these intelligent creatures. No mammal, except man, has a greater brain capacity. Thus, seals are easily domesticated and capable of being trained to a certain extent. And I agree with certain naturalists who say that if properly taught, they could be used for fishing. Most of them were asleep on the rocks or on the sand. Among the seals, properly speaking, that is, those whose ears, unlike sea lions, do not protrude from their heads, I saw several varieties of Stenorhynchi, 10 feet long, with white hair, bulldog heads, and 10 teeth in each jaw, 4 incisors in the upper and 4 in the lower jaw, and 2 large canine teeth in each jaw, shaped like lilies of the valley. Between them slithered some sea elephants, a kind of seal with a short, mobile trunk. They are the giants of the species, with bodies measuring 25 feet around and 33 feet in length. They did not move when we drew near.
Aren't those animals dangerous?
Conseil asked me. No, I answered, unless they're attacked. When a seal defends its young, its anger is terrible, and it isn't rare for them to break small fishing boats to pieces.
It's their only right to defend themselves.
I can't deny that. 2 miles farther on, we were stopped by a promontory which protected the bay from the south wind. It rose up vertically from the water, and the surf crashed against it. From beyond it, we could hear loud bellowings as if from a herd of cattle.
What is that?
Asked Conseil.
A chorus of bulls?
No, I said. A chorus of walruses.
Oh, are they fighting?
Either fighting or playing.
With Monsieur's permission, I'd love to see them.
Let's go, Conseil. And we started off, climbing over blackish rocks, among sudden landslides and stones covered with ice and therefore very slippery. More than once I fell and hurt my back. Conseil, either because he was more careful or stronger, scarcely ever tumbled, and he would say as he picked me up,
If Monsieur would be kind enough to keep his feet apart, I think Monsieur would maintain his balance better.
When we got to the ridge running along the top of the promontory, I saw a vast white plain covered with walruses. They were playing with one another. Their bellowings were of joy, not anger. Walruses resemble seals in the shape of their bodies and the disposition of their limbs, but they have no canine teeth or incisors in their lower jaw, whereas the canine teeth in their upper jaw form 2 tusks 30 inches long and 13 inches around at the base. They are made of compact, unstreaked ivory, which is harder than that of elephants, and does not turn yellow so quickly, and they are, therefore, much sought after. As a result, walruses have been hunted so indiscriminately that they will soon become extinct, for hunters kill about 4,000 a year, including pregnant females and the young. As I passed near these curious animals, I could examine them at my leisure, for they did not move. Their reddish tan skin was thick and rough. What hair they had was short. Some of them were 13 feet long. They seemed calmer and less fearful than their northern cousins, for they did not place sentinels around their camp. After examining this colony of walruses, I began to think of returning. It was 11 o'clock, and if Captain Nemo found the weather favorable for taking our position, I wanted to be present when he did. Nevertheless, I had little hope that the sun would come out that day. It was hidden from our view by clouds squashed along the horizon. It seemed as if the sun was jealous and did not want to reveal to human beings this unapproachable part of the globe. We started back toward the Nautilus, following a steep path running along the edge of the cliffs. By 11:30 we had reached our landing place. The dinghy had already returned with the captain. I saw him standing on a block of basalt. His instruments were next to him. His eyes were fixed on the northern horizon, near which the sun was describing its long arc. I went over and stood beside him without saying a word. Noon came, and as on the day before, the sun did not appear. It was bad luck for us. We still had not been able to take our position. If it was not done the next day, we would have to give up our project completely, for it was the 20th of March. The next day, the 21st, would be the equinox. From then on, the sun would disappear behind the horizon for 6 months, and with its disappearance would begin the long polar night. Since the September equinox, it had emerged from the northern horizon and risen in long spirals till December the 21st. On that day, the summer solstice of the southern hemisphere, it had started back down, and tomorrow it would send forth its last rays over the South Pole. I told Captain Nemo my thoughts and fears on this subject. "You are right, Monsieur Aronnax," he said. "If I cannot shoot the sun tomorrow, I will not be able to do so again for 6 months. But since fate has brought us here on precisely March 21st, our position will be easy to determine if the sun appears." "Why, Captain?" "Because when the sun is traveling through the sky in such elongated spirals, it is difficult to get an exact measurement of its height above the horizon, and one is in danger of making serious errors." "How will you do it, then?" "I will only use my chronometer," replied Captain Nemo. "If, at noon tomorrow, March 21st, the sun's disk is cut exactly in two by the northern horizon, that will mean I am at the South Pole." "Right," I said, "but this won't be, mathematically speaking, absolutely correct, for the equinox doesn't fall necessarily at noon." "No doubt, monsieur, but the error involved will be less than 100 yards, and that will be good enough for us. So, until tomorrow." Captain Nemo went back on board his ship. Conseil and I stayed until 5 o'clock, surveying the beach. I picked up nothing of interest, except for the egg of an auk, remarkable for its size, for which a collector would have paid more than $200. It was cream-colored and covered with streaks and lines which looked like hieroglyphics. I gave it to Conseil, and this worthy, sure-footed boy, carrying it as if it were a precious Chinese vase, brought it back to the Nautilus. There I deposited this rare egg inside one of the showcases of the museum. That night, I dined off an excellent piece of seal liver, which to me tasted rather like pork. Then I went to bed, but not before praying like a Hindu for the sun to appear. On the next day, March the 21st, I was up on the platform at 5 in the morning. I found Captain Nemo already there. "The weather's clearing up a bit," I said. "There's some hope. After breakfast, we'll go ashore and pick out an observation post." Once this had been decided, I went to find Ned Land. I would have wanted to take him with me, but the stubborn Canadian refused, and I could see that day by day he was becoming more taciturn and angry. In this particular circumstance, however, I did not mind his stubbornness. There were really too many seals on shore, and it was best not to expose a man with his hunting instincts to such a temptation. After breakfast, I went ashore. The Nautilus had moved several miles farther on during the night. It was in open water, more than 2 miles from the coast, above which rose a sharp peak about 1,500 feet high. Also in the dinghy were Captain Nemo, 2 members of the crew, and the instruments, a chronometer, a telescope, and a barometer. During the crossing, I saw many whales belonging to the 3 species peculiar to the southern waters: the right whale, which has no dorsal fin, the humpback whale, with its wrinkled belly and huge whitish fins, and the finback whale, which is yellowish-brown in color and is the liveliest of all whales. One can hear this animal a long way off when it sends up its spout of air and vapor, resembling a column of swirling smoke. Herds of these various animals were playing about in the calm water, which I now realized served them as a place of refuge from the hunters tracking them. I also noticed long white rows of salpas, a kind of shellfish which lives in colonies, and enormous jellyfish rocking back and forth in the backwash of the waves. At 9 o'clock, we reached the shore. The sky was clearing and the clouds scurrying off to the south. Mist was rising from the cold surface of the water. Captain Nemo headed for the peak, where, undoubtedly, he wanted to make his observation post. It was a difficult climb over sharp lava rock and pumice stone, through air often filled with the sulphurous gases escaping from volcanic smoke holes. Even though the captain was unaccustomed to walking on dry land, he climbed the steepest slopes with a suppleness and agility which a hunter of mountain goats would have envied, and I had difficulty keeping up with him. It took us 2 hours to reach the summit of this peak, composed partly of porphyry and partly of basalt. From there we could see a vast expanse of sea stretching out toward the northern horizon. At our feet there were shining white fields, and overhead a pale azure sky, clear of clouds. To the north the sun's disk looked like a ball of fire already cut off at the corner by the horizon. The whales swimming in the sea sent up hundreds of magnificent fan-shaped jets of water. In the distance, the Nautilus looked like yet another whale, merely sleeping. Behind us, to the south and east, a vast expanse of land, chaotically heaped with rocks and ice, stretched out as far as we could see. Upon arriving at the summit, Captain Nemo carefully calculated its altitude by means of his barometer, for this factor had to be taken into account when determining our position. At 11:45, the sun, a golden disk we could then only see by refraction, sent its last rays over this region, never before visited by men. Captain Nemo, armed with a special telescope to correct the refraction, observed the sun as it disappeared, little by little, below the horizon, travelling in a long, curving path. I was holding the chronometer. My heart was pounding. If the disappearance of the sun's half-disk coincided with noon on the chronometer, we would be, then, at the South Pole itself. "Noon," I cried. "The South Pole," replied Captain Nemo in a solemn tone of voice, passing me the telescope through which I could see the sun cut into 2 equal portions by the horizon. I watched its last rays crowning the peak and the shadows slowly climbing the slopes. Then Captain Nemo put a hand on my shoulder and said, "In 1600, the Dutchman Goethe, carried off his course by currents and storms, reached 64 degrees south latitude and discovered the South Shetland Islands. On January the 17th, 1773, the famous Cook, following the 38th meridian, reached a latitude of 67 degrees 30 minutes, and on January the 30th, 1774, following the 109th meridian, he reached a latitude of 71 degrees and 15 minutes. In 1819, the Russian Bellinghausen got to the 69th parallel, and in 1821 to the 66th at 111 degrees west longitude. In 1820, the Englishman Bransfield was stopped at the 65th parallel. That same year, the American Morel, whose accounts are doubtful, went along the 42nd meridian and discovered open sea at 70 degrees and 14 minutes south latitude. In 1825, the Englishman Powell could get no further than the 62nd parallel, but that same year, an Englishman named Weddell, who was a mere seal fisherman, got as far as 72 degrees and 14 minutes south latitude along the 35th meridian, and as far as 74 degrees and 15 minutes on the 36th. In 1829, the Englishman Forster, captain of the Chanticleer, took possession of the Antarctic continent at 63 minutes and 26 degrees, 63 degrees and 26 minutes south latitude, and 66 degrees 26 minutes west longitude. On February the 1st, 1831, the Englishman Biscoe discovered Enderby Land at a latitude of 68 degrees and 50 minutes. On February 5th, 1832, Adelaide Land at 67 degrees south latitude, and on February 21st of that same year, Graham Land at 64 degrees 45 minutes south latitude. In 1838, the Frenchman de Mont d'Urville was stopped by the Great Ice Barrier at 62 degrees 57 minutes south latitude, but managed to discover Louis Philippe Land. 2 years later, in a new expedition to the south, he discovered Adélie Land at 66 degrees and 30 minutes on January the 21st, and a week later, Clare Coast at 64 degrees 40 minutes south latitude. In 1838, the Englishman Wilkes went along the 100th meridian as far as the 69th parallel. In 1839, the Englishman Balleny discovered Sabrina Land on the edge of the Antarctic Circle. Then, on January the 12th, 1842, the Englishman James Ross, commanding the Erebus and the Terror, discovered Victoria Land at 76 degrees 56 minutes south latitude and 171 degrees 7 minutes east longitude. On the 23rd of the same month he reached the 74th parallel, the farthest point attained till then. On the 27th he reached 76 degrees and 8 minutes. On the 28th, 77 degrees and 32 minutes. And on February the 2nd, 78 degrees and 4 minutes. Later, in 1842, he returned but could get no farther than the 71st parallel. And then, on March the 21st, 1868, I, Captain Nemo, reached the South Pole at a latitude of 90 degrees, and took possession of this portion of the globe equal in area to a sixth of all known continents.
In the name of whom, Captain?
My own. With this, Captain Nemo unfurled a black banner bearing a gold letter N. He then turned toward the sun, whose last rays were flickering over the horizon, and said, "Farewell, sun. Leave us, O radiant orb. Go to thy rest beneath the sea, and let 6 months of night spread its shadows over my new domain."
And that, my friends, I think is where we will leave it for today. We usually try and read 2 chapters per episode, but that is just such a great moment to end on. I could not resist. Thank you so much for joining us for this moment on Soft Stories. I hope you enjoyed this chapter of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I certainly did, apart from the rather cruel behavior towards penguins. They are my father's favorite animal, and I love them dearly. I am glad to know that no penguins were harmed in the making of this book. With that in mind, and with the spirit of adventure in our hearts, I thank you once again for joining me. I must leave you now, but until next we meet, I wish you all the best, and goodbye.